Toybox killer, David Parker Ray, is suspected of torturing and killing more than 50 women in his airtight trailer. On the evening of March 19, 1999, while Cynthia Vigil, then 22 years old, was hooking in a parking lot in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a man posing as an undercover police officer approached her and told her she was under arrest for solicitation of sex work. Identified as David Parker Ray, he invited Vigil to his nearby soundproof trailer, or Toybox. He then dragged her into the trailer and chained her to a table. Over the course of the next 3 days, he and his accomplice, Cindy Hendy, assaulted and tortured Vigil. Ray and Hendy tortured Vigil with electric shocks, medical and sexual instruments, and whips. Ray would play a cassette tape with a recording of what she would be tortured with right before he would do it. Ray instructed her on the cassette that she was to always address him as master, his companion as mistress, and neither of them as miss unless spoken to first. Then he proceeded to detail his plans to rape and abuse her. In a follow-up interview, Vigil remarked, "The way he talked, I didn't feel like this was his first time. It seemed like he knew what he was doing. He said it was the last time I'd ever see my loved ones. He threatened to put me to death just like the rest of them." When Ray was at work on day 3, Hendy left the keys to Vigil's restraints on a table close to where Vigil was chained up. Vigil saw her chance and sprang for the keys, freeing both of her hands in the process. Vigil was able to stab Hendy with an ice pick as she tried to escape. In a panic, she bolted from the trailer, leaving behind only the slave collar and chains that were padlocked to her wrists. She frantically rang the doorbell of a nearby mobile home. After bringing Vigil inside, the homeowner called the police, who quickly apprehended Ray and Hendy and learned of their heinous history of criminal activity. Born in Belen, New Mexico in 1939, David Parker Ray has lived in the Southwest his whole life. The only real fact we know about his formative years is that he was mostly raised by his grandfather. He also visited his father, who frequently struck him. When Ray was young, his male peers picked on him because he was awkward around females. Due to his self-doubt, Ray turned to alcohol and drug abuse. He enlisted in the U.S. Army and was eventually discharged with honor. According to KOAT, Ray had 4 failed marriages before landing a job as a mechanic for New Mexico state parks. It's still not clear when Ray started his criminal career. However, it is generally accepted that it began in the middle of the 1950s. And it wasn't until Vigil escaped that anyone knew about it. After David Parker Ray was arrested for the kidnapping of Vigil, police reportedly wasted no time in obtaining a warrant to search his home and trailer. They found something inside the trailer that disturbed the authorities. In the center of Ray's toy box was a table reminiscent of a gynecologist's, and above it was a mirror so that his victims could watch themselves being tortured. There were numerous sex toys, as well as whips, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades, saws, and more, strewn about the floor. The authorities also discovered a wooden device that was likely used to restrain Ray's victims so that he and his accomplices could rape them. Chilling diagrams of various pain infliction techniques adorned the walls. A 1996 videotape showed Ray and his girlfriend terrorizing and torturing a terrified woman. It was one of many disturbing items found in the Toybox killer's trailer. Following the arrest of David Parker Ray for the abduction of Cynthia Vigil, another woman came forward with a similar story. Ray's friend Angelica Montano was drugged, assaulted, and tortured after she went to his house to borrow cake mix. Soon after, a highway abandoned Montano in the middle of the desert. The police were relieved to find her alive in that location, but nothing further had been done to investigate her disappearance. Ray regularly drugged his torture victims with narcotics like sodium pentothal and phenobarbital so that they wouldn't be able to recall the details of their ordeals. The case against the Toybox killer strengthened, however, after both Vigil and Montano testified to Ray's crimes. Ray's girlfriend and co-conspirator Cindy Hendy caved to police pressure and began telling them what she knew about the kidnappings. The police were able to piece together from her statements that multiple people had aided Ray during the kidnappings and rapes. Glenda, Jessie Ray, Ray's own daughter, and Dennis Roy Yancey, a friend of Ray's, were among his conspirators. The victims of at least some of these vicious assaults were ultimately killed. After Ray and his daughter kidnapped, drugged, and tortured Marie Parker for days, Yancey strangled her to death in 1997, and Yancey later admitted to his involvement in the brutal murder. Although at least one more woman managed to escape the Toybox killer's torture chamber, this story is horrifying and has chilling implications for David Parker Ray's other unidentified victims. Ray's trailer contained a videotape from 1996 in which a victim can be seen being raped and tortured. After information about the woman in the video became public, her ex-mother-in-law was able to positively identify her as Kelly Garrett based on physical characteristics. Jessie Parker Ray, David Parker Ray's daughter, and Garrett were once good friends. Garrett and her then-husband had an argument on July 24, 1996, and she and Jessie went out to a bar to unwind by shooting some pool. While Garrett wasn't looking, Jessie chugged her beer. Jessie and her dad put a collar and leash on Garrett at some point later and took her to the Toybox killer's trailer. David Parker Ray subjected her to 2 days of SA and torture in that room. Then Ray slashed her throat and left her for dead by the side of the road. Neither Garrett's husband or the police believed her account that she had miraculously survived the brutal attack. In fact, her husband filed for divorce that very same year because he was convinced she had cheated on him that night. Because of the drugs, Garrett only remembered a fragment of what happened over those 2 days, but he did recall being raped by the Toybox killer. It is believed that David Parker Ray committed a series of crimes between the middle of the 1950s and the late 1990s. It's likely that he was successful for so long because he preyed on many women from lower-income backgrounds. The fact that he drugged his victims greatly reduced the likelihood that the few who survived would ever reveal the full extent of his atrocities. However, many details about Ray's crimes remain a mystery, including the possible number of people he murdered. Over 50 women were reportedly killed by him, but he was never convicted of their murders. The trailer of the Toybox killer was searched by police, and inside they found evidence of multiple murders, including diaries written by Ray that described the gruesome deaths of multiple women. The FBI says that authorities found hundreds of items of jewelry, clothing, and other personal effects. The items were thought to have belonged to people who had been killed by Ray. Together, these facts and David Parker Ray's dedication to his Toybox suggest an unfathomably high number of potential victims. Authorities, however, were unable to manufacture new cases despite having ample material with which to work. Hendy and Yancey said they knew where Ray dumped bodies, but the police couldn't confirm their suspicions. We may never know how many people Ray killed, but we do know that he is serving a life sentence for the murders of Vigil, Montano, and Garrett. The final sentence handed down for the Toybox killer was 224 years. According to the court, Jessie Ray must serve 9 years in prison. The judge gave Cindy Hendy a 36-year sentence. Both of them were granted an early release, and they are now free to go about their lives. Not long after beginning his life sentence, on May 28, 2002, David Parker Ray died of a heart attack. To put his age in perspective, he passed away at the young age of 62. Despite the passage of time, authorities are still trying to link the numerous victims they believe were murdered by the Toybox killer. In an interview with the Albuquerque Journal in 2011, FBI spokesman Frank Fisher said, "We're still getting good leads. We're going to keep looking into this as long as we're getting those leads and as long as the press keeps generating interest in the case."